Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about Wildstar in 2019. Now, it's been a really long time since I've made a dedicated video to Wildstar, but as we're coming upon the 1-year anniversary of the day it was shut down, I figured now was a good time to go down memory lane. And I'm always torn about talking about Wildstar. I talk about it all the time when I'm comparing other MMOs and just openly thinking about what some MMOs did well and what some MMOs did poorly. And it's hard because I have a lot of good memories with Wildstar. I do miss it every day. And I wish I had played it more when it was there. It's kind of one of those things that when it was alive, when it was well, or even not so well, there was a big time where I took a break from the game, and I regret doing that now because, well, hey, I can't come back to it anymore. But yeah, so the game shut down on November 28th in 2018, so it has been pretty much a year that it's been shut down. Since then, there's no way to play Wildstar from what I've been able to gather. So yeah, there's that. I'm sure people are working on figuring stuff out, but that's not what this video is about. Today, we're really just remembering what that game was for me and what it was for a lot of people. And the biggest thing that would make me happy is if you're someone who played the game, if you're someone who has watched some of my videos about the game or watched anyone play the game, just in the comments, if you wanted to share your favorite thing about Wildstar, you know, even if it's a very tiny thing that you thought that game did well, even if you hated the rest of the game or whatever, because there are valid complaints about the game for sure, and we'll get into that in a second. But just share your one piece of, you know, what did you like about the game? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share what I liked about the game and what I didn't like about the game, because it's hard to say that there was certain things I didn't like about the game as well. It's very true. There's certain things that made the game fail. The game did fail, and there's obvious reasons to why it did fail in my mind. So let's get into it. We'll start with some positive. The big ones, I guess, the combat, the movement. Playing Wildstar felt like you weren't playing an MMO. And it felt that way in the best way possible. It felt like you were playing a single-player game because you had so much movement. You could jump, you could double jump, you could dash, you could ride hoverboards. There was different gravity. You had full action combat that allowed you to jump up things or dash in midair. It felt like a completely different experience, and to this day, I don't think I've been able to find an MMO that has felt quite like that. On the contrary, most MMOs that I play feel very much like they're anchored to the ground. They're on rails in some way. The world feels very contained and not open. And that's just something that Wildstar didn't have issues with. Now, yes, parts of that exact same movement, that exact same combat style did, you know, have issues in the game. I think in particular, despite the fact that action combat sounds really great for PvP and stuff like that, the addition of telegraphs on large-scale PvP combat made it very confusing to understand what was going on. I think there was many times when you were playing Battlegrounds where all you would see is just a big swarm of colors of different telegraphs, and you wouldn't really know what was happening. And I think that was a weak point of the game, only to be made much better when you did finally try like a 2v2 or 3v3 arena, and you truly felt how good the combat felt on a lower scale. So there was definitely something to be said about their combat system in both low and high number of players, but it did work in certain scenarios really, really well. And then when it came to anything that was PvE, be it dungeons, be it raids, be it open world exploration, the combat felt just delightful. It was something. Oh, it was so good. And it was also unique in some ways. Like, you had some very different feeling classes. In particular, one of my main classes was the engineer, which I think is one of my favorite iterations of a class that does sci-fi super well. It brings, some very traditional ranged elements, but at the same time, you can be a ranged tank, which, let's be honest, isn't something you see very often in games. It has some bots that have occasionally poor, movement and stuff like that, with like any pet class has, but they felt very unique and they added flavor to the game. They were adorable. They had little faces on them. It was a really fun class, and I miss playing my engineer. I really do. What else did the game have going for it? The different art style, the art style. Okay, the art style I can see some people loving, some people hating. I think the big issue when you release new MMOs these days is that everyone expects it to be cutting edge, Unreal Engine 4 or whatever it is, very realistic looking graphics, right? And that's a very big expectation, leading towards Black Desert Online graphics and stuff like that. But I think, cartoony, colorful graphics do have their place in the world. Certainly in the world, certainly in the MMO market as well. And I think they really allow the game to age better. For instance, if you're looking at World of Warcraft, yes, it doesn't have great graphics, but it has graphics that aren't laughable because they are cartoony. If they had tried to do something really, really realistic at the time, the graphics would be in a much worse state than they are now. Of course, that might have forced them to really invest in new graphics, which could have, been a really nice point as well, but it's where we are. So I think the cartooniness definitely worked well with the theme of Wildstar. Certainly with the humor, with the cowboy-iness, the sci-fi, it's a weird theme. Like, I don't think I've ever played a game that was like Wildstar. It had a very different feeling whenever you did something. One of the most memorable moments is the announcer that would come over every time you leveled up and would, call you a cupcake or curse at you or something like that. And it was, the first time you heard it, you were like, what was that? And then you're like, okay, so this game doesn't take itself seriously all the time. But once again, this was kind of an issue in some situations because it's hard when a game doesn't take itself seriously a lot, for it all of a sudden to deliver story about the world that is very serious, because they did have some interesting story tangents that unfortunately, might not have gotten fleshed out as much as they could have. But it's hard to flip between humor and seriousness as quickly as Wildstar did. And I think they did a really good job. I just wonder if that was off-putting to the community in some situations. But I think the ultimate failure of this MMO was too high of expectations. And I think, rightly so, a lot of the MMO world was extremely hyped about this game. It had everything going for it, and there was a tremendous amount of popularity when it launched. The game, however, and this happens all the time, had its issues. It wasn't ready, and it's easy to say they launched it too soon, but no matter what, games typically have some sort of issues. Now, yes, there's some, some big issues that they could have resolved, and maybe that would have been enough to get people to stay. But I think one of the bigger issues is there is a disconnect between what people think they want in the MMO world and what they actually do end up wanting. And we've seen that, this can be alleviated in certain situations. And to a degree, people do want a polished version of what they've had in the past. For instance, let's look at World of Warcraft Classic. It is delivering a grindiness and attunement processes and stuff like that, and large-scale raids, but it's a very polished product. They said, we're going to deliver the hardcore, but we're going to, take some time and really get it to a nice place that we think is enjoyable. Whereas Wildstar was kind of launching the hardcore traditional MMO, but it was its first crack at it. So there were still those bugs, there were still those issues, those learning curves about what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And I don't think it's that part there that MMO players aren't really willing to deal with. And it really spun out of control pretty quick because we had some initial issues. We had some of the senior team kind of leave, and then it became this system of negative feedback, right? Where we'd have more negative news, and it very quickly spiraled to an issue where the population of the game became the main reason you couldn't play it. And that was ultimately when I had to take a break from the game, because I couldn't queue for stuff. Like, it took too long to do anything. There was a bit of a bounce back with the free-to-play model, as you traditionally see when that does get announced. But even then, I think the writing was on the wall that it was going into maintenance mode, and as we can see, it didn't last very long. And to a degree, I think it's nice that it didn't last to a point where there was absolutely no one, where there was still quite a vibrant community and people still miss it. But I think it would have been missed anyways, and I can't say I wish I could go back onto my house, my little housing plot, and see it any day. But yeah, guys, I think this is a good point for us to call it. I just really wanted to share some thoughts on Wildstar, and I'd love to hear your own thoughts in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully one day I see you back in Nexus.